Hot off the heels of the raging success that was Star Trek First Contact, Paramount was keen to capitalise on the success and get a sequel lined up as quickly as possible. Producers were quick to scramble behind the scenes, and the end result was Star Trek Insurrection. Hoping to replicate the success of First Contact, a lot of the elements for Star Trek Insurrection are the same. We have a returning director, music composer, producers, and of course, the next generation cast. In my opinion, this film is a very worthy entry into the Star Trek franchise. I don't think it's particularly earth-shattering, but I don't think it's a massive disappointment either. However, the film didn't manage to capture the imaginations of the average cinema-goer, and as a result it's underperformed slightly and brought in less money than the previous entry. Sadly, this was but a foreshadow of things to come for Star Trek in this era, as the next film, Nemesis, would fall significantly under expectations, underperforming, and also receiving quite a mixed critical reception. As a result, there would be no more Star Trek films for another 6 years, by which time, of course, the franchise would be relaunched and rebooted under the stewardship of J.J. Abrams. But Insurrection was released at a very interesting time for Star Trek. The brand had been immensely popular all through the 90s, spinning off various shows and having regular cinema films. There were computer games, tie-in novels, amusement rides and interactive experiences, and of course, a very healthy toy line from Playmates. When First Contact was released, it was something of a surprise just how popular, how immensely successful this film had been. And although Playmates had a couple of dedicated lines to it, they had a 9-inch line of about 4 figures and a smaller 6-inch scale line, it feels as though they missed an opportunity to really explore the brand a lot more with supporting toys. So when Insurrection came around, Playmates were ready to capitalise on the film's release. They dedicated 2 lines of action figures in 2 different scales. They had a 9-inch scale line and, for the first time, a 12-inch scale line as well. And so, as the proud owner of all of the figures in this 12-inch line, I'm going to be taking a closer look today at these figures. There were 5 official figures released in this wave. As we can see here, we have Captain Picard, Riker, Worf, Data, and Jordy LaForge. Sadly, this isn't a full crew complement, nor does it include any villains. However, I have a lot of affection for this line, and I really like that for the most part, the figures are actually in their crew uniforms, so they can represent virtually any of the movie era adventures. So as ever, let's take a look at the packaging. As we can see here, they've ran with the motif of the dust cloud in space, or I suppose the briar patch on this front flap, and there's that lovely cut out there so we can see the figure within, which is fantastic. And the colours here are really nice. That Star Trek logo is very strong, and of course, on the right hand side we have that fantastic illustrated image of the Enterprise. And when we open the flap, we can see that that image stretches out both in the interior card inlay behind the figure, but also out into the interior flap as well. So this is a nice, strong visual image of the Enterprise against the starry backdrop, and it looks really impressive. I think this looks wonderfully displayable and very presentable overall. On the left hand side, of course, we have a bit of information about the character. We have some images both from the TV show and also from the film, and there's a little bit of a bio about the character, which is fantastic. Meanwhile, on the right hand side, of course, we have that window display so we can see the figure in all his glory there. Meanwhile, on the reverse, we have what is quite surprising, an awful lot of text and no images of other figures in the lines, although they are mentioned at the very bottom. There's no images to support this or to get people excited, but what we do have is a Star Trek history, which is quite interesting and quite different. I don't think I've seen this on any other toy packaging before, but I quite like it because it charts the entire history of the show, starting with obviously the original series and going through all the spin-offs up to the films, which I think is actually quite a novel and interesting way of approaching this. My only real gripe with this packaging is that it is identical for every character. The only thing that changes is the nameplate on the side of the packaging. Otherwise, it is the same. And it would have been nice if there had been something unique and distinctive about each packaging that reflected the character, maybe an illustration either of the figure or of the character from the film. Would have been nice to just set it off and make it really displayable on the shelf. But as it is, it's still very nice packaging. I still think it's quite attractive and, as I said, very presentable. So first up, let's take a look at Captain Picard. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this figure is that they've opted for the ceremonial uniform from the very beginning of the film, and I must say I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, it's nice that it is a very different costume, it is distinctly different, and it stands out amongst the collection. On the other hand, he wears this outfit very, very briefly in the film, and it does wear it very briefly in the next film as well. And it's not what I tend to think of when I think of Captain Picard. It's not one of the outfits I tend to associate with this character, and probably I would have preferred to have just had him in his usual uniform. But having said that, I do commend them on their head sculpt. I think this is absolutely fantastic, and to this day, I actually think it's one of the best Patrick Stewart likenesses I've seen on a Star Trek figure. I also have to commend the little details that have gone into this outfit because it is very nicely tailored. Again, for a figure that is essentially from the late 90s and using what is basically the Action Man style approach to making figures, there's a surprising amount of attention to detail and little details in this figure that make it cut above other lines of the time. And one of these little details here is the little trims around the outfit that we can see it's embroidered, and particularly these command pips on the collar there are obviously a separate piece that have been sewn in, and they look really, really nice. I also like that there's multiple layers to this costume, and so this top coat is actually a separate piece. It's not all sewn in, which is great. However, obviously, if you were to take it off, you can see that underneath it is essentially just a tank top, so that spoils the look somewhat. But there's definitely a sense of them taking extra care with this presentation. And we can see this throughout the rest of the costume as well. We can see the little bands around the cuffs there, which are really nice, and again, the piping on the legs is very nicely done. There's multiple layers and just different textures running throughout this figure, which are really nicely done. And this runs all the way down to the feet, which you'll notice are actually a solid piece, and then the trousers actually have an elastic band that wraps around the sole of the shoes there to keep them in place. So all in all, it looks really solid, really nicely presented, nice and tight and in place all the time. And that's helped by the fact that the central body of the costume is all one piece that is sewn together, so there's no danger that this costume is going to ride up or look unseemly or anything like that. It's always going to look really good. Now, something I did want to touch on, and I'll definitely come back to this a little bit later when it comes to the accessories, but it's the hands. You'll notice the hands again have adopted that Action Man style of having those big gripping hands that are neither a fist nor an open hand. They're just kind of clasped slightly so they can hold things. So they can look a little bit clunky and a little bit strange, especially on a character like Captain Picard, because of course all the characters have the exact same hands. And to make matters worse, these aren't rubber hands like they would be on an Action Man of the time. These are a hard plastic, so there's no give, there's no flexibility in them whatsoever. Now, in terms of the articulation scheme, it is identical across all the figures, so I'll just run through it at once. There is a swivel at the head there, the neck, so it can rotate all the way around, but it cannot look up or down. There is a ball jointed shoulder, so the arms can kick up and go out to the side, which is great. There is a single jointed elbow, so the arm bends to about 90 degrees, and then there is another swivel at the wrist. But again, it is just a swivel, there is no hinge here. That said though, there is a ball jointed waist, which allows the figure to rotate from side to side, wobble forwards and backwards a little bit, but they can rotate around, as you can see. So there's actually plenty of movement, a big range of movements in this figure, which is great. There's also hinged hips, so the legs kick out to the side, they can kick forwards as well, which is great, and they can go backwards a little bit as well, which is fantastic. And then there's a single jointed knee, so again, the knee can bend to about 90 degrees. Sadly, there's no articulation in the feet whatsoever. Now, these figures come with a variety of extra bits and pieces and accessories, most of which are taken from the 9-inch scale and scaled up to the 12-inch dimensions, but we get things like data pads, tricorders, assault rifle phasers, and of course your bog standard Type 2 phaser. But they also come with some film or character specific pieces as well, including this phaser rifle that Data has, and of course this bazooka that comes with a Captain Picard figure, whilst Worf comes with his ever trusty bat'leth. Now, these props are really nicely painted, very accurately sculpted, and overall are pretty impressive. The only problem is the hands, as I noted before. They are that hard plastic, and a lot of these pieces are quite chunky. So to get them through that grip, you've got to really persevere and try to get them through. And in some cases, like with the phaser rifle, the main handle here is just too thick. And really, to force it through, you're going to have to snap the fingers to do it, and I've never been brave enough to go that far because I don't want to break the toy. So I think it might be possible if you persevere long enough, but it feels very, very difficult. Some of the smaller accessories work really well, and although there's a bit of resistance, you have to persevere with them, they do snap into place and look pretty good in the hands once there. So things like the tricorder or the Type 2 phaser, you're not going to have too many problems with, but anything that is bigger or chunkier is going to present problems. So next up we have Riker, and once again they've put him in the ceremonial outfit from the very beginning of the film, but of course there is a subtle difference. He does have the grey top this time around, and I'm quite pleased about this because again it does give him a little bit of distinctiveness and make him stand out a little bit in the collection. Now, in terms of the head sculpt, I don't think this is bad. I don't think they've done a very bad job of him here. It's definitely caught the likeness of Jonathan Frakes, but I don't think it's really sharp. And I think part of that is because the features are just a little bit too soft. It hasn't got some of the nuance, some of the lines and features of Jonathan Frakes' face that really makes it very clear that this is Riker. So this looks like an airbrushed version of Jonathan Frakes, and his head doesn't look quite right somehow. So it's not bad, it just looks a bit toyetic, a bit oversimplified to be a really solid likeness. So this is a little bit disappointing compared with the Picard, which, as I said, I felt was very, very strong. But exactly with Picard, the tailoring on this figure is very, very nice. Again, he has that jacket there and he has the same tank top effect underneath, but it is all sewn into the pants, and I think they've done a very nice job of this. But as I touched on before, they are essentially reusing the same body molds for every single figure. So when it comes to scale and putting these characters next to each other, they don't look quite accurate. So Captain Picard, Riker, Worf, they all have the exact same body, the exact same frame, and they're all the exact same height. So you're not going to get that lifelike or realistic impression as you would get on screen. But then for the price tag, and considering the market is aimed at, which was squarely in the main children, although of course they do also appeal to the adult collectors of that time, I still think these figures are remarkably good for their time. Out of the 5 figures in this Insurrection 12-inch line, I have to say I think Riker is probably the weakest, and that all comes down purely to the head sculpt, but there's nothing really unique or distinctive about him that makes him stand out in the collection. Next up we have Worf, and Worf has to be one of my favourite characters from Star Trek, full stop, and I have to say this figure is probably my favourite in this entire line as well. First of all, he's got an absolutely fantastic head sculpt, and once again the resemblance to the character we see on screen is really, really strong. There's some excellent detail in the cranial ridges there and the beard and the eyes, and I just think, yeah, they've really nailed this. But I also like some of the extra detail that we can see, the braiding for example. There's the detail in the hair itself, which again, nicely sculpted, so it looks like hair, which is great, but also in that braiding there, where in that ponytail to keep it together, there's a use of different colours here to really make it stand out. It just looks really strong in my opinion. The only thing that lets this figure down is the sash. I think this just looks a little bit too slim, a little bit too narrow, and there's not a lot going on in terms of paint wash just to make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more authentic, a bit more used and real, a bit more metallic. It just looks what it is, a thin plastic piece draped around his shoulders. But I really love that it comes with a fully scaled up bat'leth. I think this is a fantastic accessory. It's quite simple in terms of its detailing. There's not a lot of paint apps going on, but we do see 2 distinct colours, and I think overall it looks really solid. It looks pretty much what you'd expect to see on screen, and I just really glad they included this, because this isn't an accessory we really see him use in the film, so it's really cool that he's got it. And for me, this prop alone really elevates this figure because it just looks really super cool on display and makes him look really vibrant and distinctive, and just, yeah, he really pops. So I think he's a really fantastic release, and as I said, he is my personal favourite. There's something about him that I think even in today's standards, he still stands up remarkably well. Moving on to Data, and we can see, of course, they have put him in his standard Starfleet uniform, which is great. I'm really glad they did this for the 12-inch line, because in the 9-inch line, they experimented and put them in their civilian outfits, whereas obviously for the 12-inch, they put them in their Starfleet uniforms, which is fantastic. And like I said, it makes them a lot more versatile if you want to imagine them from different films. Now, the head sculpt once again I think is pretty solid. You might say that it's a little bit soft in terms of the features once again, a bit like Riker in that sense. However, I don't think I've ever really seen a bad sculpt of Data on virtually any figure. They've always been pretty much a success. So I think, once again, this is a pretty solid likeness. It could have had a little bit more nuance, a few more lines, but overall I'm very, very happy with this. This is clearly recognisable as Brent Spiner, and I think, yeah, they've done a really nice job of it. These uniforms are one piece, and of course they are quite generic, very obviously uniform, they're standardised across all of the figures in this line, but they still have some nice little details like the trims on the cuffs here, and of course the embroidered Starfleet insignia or comm badge on the breast there, which I think it looks really, really nice, and yeah, I think it's very presentable. And overall, Data makes a really nice solid addition. I particularly like the sort of vibrant orange yellow for his collar there. I think looks really attractive, and overall I just think it's a very nicely presented figure. And finally we have Jordy LaForge. Now interestingly, Jordy wasn't released as part of the initial lineup. There were just 4 figures to begin with, but he was later added in a subsequent wave of 12-inch figures. So again, really pleased to finally have him. It's just a shame we're missing a couple of other key crew members from this line. Once again, I have to say, I think the head sculpt is really, really solid, and I think the likeness is very, very strong here. I think they've really caught some of the features, and they've done a really nice job of like the facial hair and the eyes particularly. I think they've really caught LeVar Burton here, so I think they've done a really nice job. But I have to say, in all honesty, this isn't my favourite look for Jordy. I much prefer him with the visor, because that to me is how I always think of Jordy. And of course, I'm aware he doesn't wear that in any of the films, so fair play. Obviously, when he's wearing this outfit, he's not going to have that. So I think they've done a really nice job of it, but that said, if I was going to have a 12-inch action figure of Jordy, I would rather he was in his Next Generation outfit from the TV show. But sadly, they didn't produce any more figures from the movie era in this 12-inch scale, which is a real shame because of course we're missing characters like Troy and Crusher from just really rounding out our complete set. And as I said before, there's no villains, there's no Ruafu, there isn't a Borg, and there certainly isn't any characters from Nemesis. And whilst there weren't a great many 12-inch figures produced in their Star Trek line, frustratingly, Playmates did release a Deanna Troi in her classic Next Generation TV version outfit, which is obviously the silver outfit here, which is a real shame because I would rather she was in her movie outfit so I could have had a complete distinctive set, or alternatively had the other characters in their Next Generation TV show outfits. As it is, it feels like you've got a disjointed collection here, which doesn't quite marry up, which is a real shame. In fact, the only other character to get a 12-inch release in his classic TV show outfit was Captain Picard, released in a special deluxe set, which was, I think they called the Masterpiece Collection. They did a Captain Picard and they did a Captain Kirk. And as we can see, Captain Picard here is in his usual red outfit from the midpoint of the TV show, which again uses the same head sculpt, the same body, but has the TV show outfit. And it looks really, really nice. So it's a shame we didn't get more as a follow-up. But in summary, I really don't have anything but good things to say about this line. Yes, certainly some of the features and some of the likenesses are a little bit soft, a little bit too toyetic. Yes, of course, they all use the same body mold and are pretty much uniform across the line. And it is a shame that we didn't get more characters to round out this collection. All that being said, I do think that these are actually surprisingly nicely rendered. They're very well tailored. They have nice little details like the pips on the collars, and some of the accessories they come with are very faithful to what we see on screen. And I think some of these figures, in particular characters like Worf, really stand out. Even by today's standards, they look really good on the shelf, which I think is high praise for something that was priced very low in the late 90s. So yeah, if you're a fan and you missed any of these figures, if you've never picked them up before and you're curious, I definitely think these are worth your time. And if you're missing one or two in your collection, I would heartily recommend that you go and pick them up if you can. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.